Hello, everybody. Welcome to another live stream with my good friend Steve Wright. Today, we are going to talk about this gut health and seasonal allergy issue a little more in depth. We went into this last month, and I think some interesting questions were raised. So, we decided we were going to just dive a little more deeper into the topic. So, thank you for being here today, Steve.
Thanks for having me, Sarah.
Yeah. And do you want to just while we wait for some people to pop on, just kind of briefly introduce yourself and a little bit about your story?
Yeah, sure. Well, we're coming here or coming to you live from a balcony at a residence inn in Scottsdale because our home is getting new floors and new paint right now, so I don't want to live through that. Actually,
Yeah.
I think we got kicked out because of the floors, but so I apologize if there's crazy birds or leaf blowers or whatever happens. And yeah, I mean, if you haven't heard one of our almost 10 interviews now, I
Yep.
think,
Yep.
my background is from birth. I had GI issues and allergy issues. I had exercise-induced asthma. I had really bad seasonal allergies. It kind of runs in my family.
Mm.
I trained as an electrical engineer in school, and then did functional medicine training with Dan Kalish at the Kalish Institute. Had a clinic for a little while as a consultant, and have been writing and researching and developing various programs and outlines for various types of gut health conditions since 2009 actually. But personally, I've been experimenting on myself since I was 13, so that's over 25 years or something like that now, 24 years. So yeah, so this is kind of just what happened to me in life, and this is what the path life chose for me, I think. And just so happens I love substances and I love the chemistry, and I also love trying to get things to work for myself and for other people with the least amount of risk and the highest reward.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the talks that we've had, I think have been helpful to a ton of people. So I know we probably get a lot of repeat guests listening in, but we do have a playlist that's linked in the information section for you guys if you want to go back and listen to any of our old talks. We've talked about all sorts of things. But last month, like I said, we really kind of dove into how poor gut health can cause these seasonal allergies because we're in the middle of allergy season here. The since the last time we talked, the grass pollen popped up, which is the here in Georgia where I live, and that one can be like even worse than some of the trees that were blooming when we talked last month. And so I've just been kind of watching myself this year to see like, okay, how strong is my gut really, right? How good is my gut health after working on it for all this time? So can we just dive into that a little bit just to review if anyone missed last month's chat? And that is also linked in the show notes as well if anyone wants to watch the full chat. But how could someone having poor gut health be a big contributor to these seasonal allergies?
Yeah, so I mean, let's just start with a context setting. So the way that I think about this is that allergies are a result of a mismatch between your body and its environment. So that's the symptom. So because your body is not able to uh, tolerate and regulate itself in response to its environment, it is producing side effects. Those side effects are what you feel, these allergies. And so the question is, does everybody, like all 100% of everyone who lives in your area, exhibit these side effects? If the water's poisoned with lead, then yeah, probably yes. So that's maybe not the body's issue. That's the environmental thing that should be changed. But with seasonal allergies, typically it's not the case. While it does run in family systems, there are plenty of people in various states when the big blooms happen that don't exhibit any seasonal allergies. In fact, I don't even know if it's more than 50% of people. So, so what that tells me is that the body can handle it and it can regulate to the environment even when the pollen load is high. Now, that doesn't mean that every day, like it doesn't mean that every once in a while you might not get a little puffy eye or a little nasal drip or something like that. I think that's kind of a normal part of the body trying to regulate. But if it's happening and it's disrupting your life and it's disrupting the things that you want to achieve or participate in life, then we have a total mismatch. And so the question is, how is that happening? Well, the gut is where the majority of the histamine and the mast cells are at. It's also where the majority of the immune system is at. The analogy I gave last time was that if this was a video game and you were able to look into your body and put it up on the screen and see like, okay, I only have 100 immune. Where are they located? Because I want to focus in on them. Well, 80 of the 100, 70 to 80 would be focused right in your abdomen, right around the tubes that are your gut, basically. And so that concentration says that there is a big sort of mixing of signals and interplay between the gut and the gut's ability to function, as well as the immune system and the immune system's regulation to the outside world. Because again, we're talking about a mismatch between the body's ability to be in relationship to its environment. The gut technically is outside world, even though it's inside your cavity. And so this makes perfect sense for where the immune system would get information about what's happening out there. And so people who tend to have less gut function, meaning they exhibit, heartburn or bloating or gas or loose stools or constipation, they don't tolerate a lot of foods. These people tend to also have immune dysregulation. And one of those things they typically tend to have for some folks is these seasonal allergies.
Yeah. And like you said, sometimes it runs in families, but what also kind of runs in families is a microbiome, right? Like you share the microbiome with the people that you live with, which can be good or bad.
You also share food.
Yep.
You also share stress. You typically share sunlight patterns.
Yes.
So there's a number of reasons why family history is so important and so reasonable.
Yep.
For it to be happening that way.
Absolutely.
If everybody's eating a really junky diet, or if everybody's exhibiting a lot of stress, then a lot of people in the whole family might have low stomach acid or might have low enzyme function. And therefore they might also then have immune dysregulation.
Yeah. And I know we talked about this a lot in the last conversation, but just briefly, how would low stomach acid or low enzymatic function affect these seasonal allergies?
Yeah. So, briefly, because I know today we want to get a little deeper into some other immune stuff. Briefly, though, there are studies, just a few of them so far in recent years, around stomach acid being a neutralizer of incoming stuff. And that includes pathogens, potentially pollen, that includes bugs like viruses and bacteria, other things like that. And so when your stomach function is not strong enough, the acid bath isn't doing its job, and you see more reactions. There's some skin prick. There's one skin prick study on low stomach acid that I found where people, when they do the pollen studies and they see how big the rash gets, the people with low stomach acid had a bigger rash. And that was in response to food, I believe. I don't think that was actually testing grass or anything like that. And then there's also studies that show when you have low stomach acid, your mouth is always making bacteria and LPS as well. Because of that, those LPS should be neutralized by the stomach acid. And in people with low stomach acid, they're not getting neutralized. And then the LPS load in the upper small intestine is much higher. And then those people have greater issues. And so stomach acid really is an important part of digestion, but also immune system function. And I think it's very underrated as far as a place to start to try to have better health.
I agree. And I think a lot of, just to jump in the immune conversation before we dive into some of these deeper topics with allergies, I think a lot of people that have autoimmune conditions like Hashimoto's is a huge one these days. That's one of the first things I'll tell people with Hashimoto's to check out is their stomach acid levels, because, if you have low stomach acid, you could be exacerbating some of those things that you're experiencing with Hashimoto's, with thyroid issues, right?
Yeah, 100%. It's always one of those things where stomach acid is related to everything because everything goes through the stomach, basically.
Exactly. Cool.
And then
Yeah, go ahead.
And then enzymes are the
Yep.
next step after that. And so if you're trying to, let's say, just get all the nutrients out of your carnivore diet or your organic diet, whatever you might be eating at this point, if you have low enzymatic function, you're more likely to feed other bugs like SIBO or Candida or whatever else, or just feed the toilet. Like if you look in the toilet and you see, you can actually see
Seafood
parts of the
particles.
meal
Yep.
that you ate. That shouldn't, that's not healthy.
Right.
That shouldn't be happening. So if that's happening, you're not absorbing the nutrients from your food, and that could include all kinds of anti-inflammatory compounds, things that might support a less inflammatory response or less mast cell response. And so low enzyme function typically goes hand in hand with low stomach acid. They're typically found together. And a lot of people can really change the amount of food they can handle, the types of food they can handle, and then therefore the responses to those foods just through modulating their stomach acid and their enzyme function. And then that typically spreads over time to other conditions that they may be trying to get help with.
Yeah, I mean, that's one thing for me that was life-changing a year ago when I kind of started. It's been over a year ago now when I started with the healthy gut products, the HCl and the enzymes, is that was the first time that I was able to kind of get my blood glucose to chill the hell out. Even when I was eating, no carbohydrates, I would still have issues with blood glucose. And so that was one of the things, adding in HCl, adding in some enzymes, that I think I started to extract the nutrients. My blood sugar stabilized out a lot more. And I've seen that with a few of my clients as well. So just such a small thing like that we just don't think about. We think about, let's control the food more and more and more, which can help. But if your digestive system's not working properly, then you can just eat the greatest food in the world and still have some of those issues, right?
Yeah, typically, even high blood glucose, these are all your body's doing its best job it can to keep you alive, and that's
Yep.
just a response to something gone wrong.
Yep. Exactly.
And if you're not consuming tons of carbohydrates and tons of sugars, then clearly it's a deeper issue than just the food you're putting in.
Exactly. Exactly. Cool. Well, just to kind of go to our first little topic, let's talk a little bit more about allergies in general. And can you explain the difference between IgE allergies and IgG allergies and how the gut plays into those both?
Yeah, I'll do my best, and just know that I'm not an immunologist,
Right.
and my views are definitely just kind of my theoretical views based on my experience and what's worked and what hasn't worked. I did try all those allergy shots for several
Yep.
years. I
We
tried
did
lots of
those.
things. None of that really ever moved the needle for me until I actually healed my gut. So I do have I have a bent, or I have a lens of how I see things. So take that into consideration as you listen to this. So
Yes.
theoretically, and in some studies, IgG allergies are your anaphylactic allergies. And so these are more common in children than they are in adults. I think that's really fascinating. Why is it that some people have a scary, deadly peanut allergy as a child, but then later on in life don't seem to have the exact same experience? Why is it
Mhm.
that some kids can get a bee sting and have to get an EpiPen, but then once they turn 20, that's not an issue when they get stung? Like that's really interesting to me, and I'll come back to that here in a second. But in general, an IgG allergy is a smaller percent. They estimate 2 to 5% of the population have a anaphylactic like reaction to various either foods or environmental allergens. And the reason why is that the IgG antigen actually basically is corresponding to histamine release. And so when
Mhm.
the IgG antibody, or not antibody, but immunoglobulin actually like attaches, there's a histamine release. And so if you think about like what happens with that, you get like flushing, tachycardia, breathlessness, like rashes, things like that. All of those things are all similar to what someone with mast cell activation syndrome or really bad histamine intolerance also experiences to, say, wine or strawberries or some other fish or some other high histamine foods. And so IgG is highly correlated to histamine and histamine issues. And I think that's where we get into this very confusing thing where you get into IgE. Wait,
Mm-hmm.
have I been saying that wrong the whole time? I've been saying that wrong the whole time. IgE is what I was talking about in the beginning. IgG is the less reactive, non-anaphylactic issues. So my bad. I've been talking about that backwards the whole time.
Flip it.
Flip it. So yeah, so IgE are the histamine related anaphylactic ones. IgG are the late onset, less reactive ones that can show up between 1 and 3 days, which makes it super confusing.
Mm-hmm.
Theoretically, and some experts talk about it like this because theoretically it's true. You could eat something today that you're actually going to produce an IgG reaction to, like a food or something, let's say dairy,
Right.
and not feel anything for up to 3 days. But on
Yep.
like say day 3, you wake up and you're like, oh, I feel terrible. I didn't sleep good. What is going on? And you're like just going through the list of things like, did I go to bed on time? Did I have alcohol? Did I work out yesterday? What did I eat? And you'll just drive yourself insane because yesterday you were actually spot on. But
Mm-hmm.
a day prior to that, you had a little dairy, and you can go kind of insane trying to figure that out.
Yeah.
I mean, literally, I've tried to work it out before.
It's hard. It really is tough. Yep.
Because you really can never know if the delayed onset is 48 to 72 hours. What was it?
Right.
Right. And so that's super frustrating. Now, in general, the IgGs have less histamine. They're not necessarily histamine producing or histamine releasing, and they tend to be way less intense, which is why they're not the anaphylactic type. And they tend to occur for a lot more people. And so that is like a summary of sort of the I think the conventional point of view, or I don't even know if that's conventional, but that might be the more integrative point of view. I actually think it's all on a bit of a continuum, right?
Yeah.
I think it's wild that we would say like, oh, the peanut allergy is only happening in the IgE and not in the IgG. That's probably not actually true. It's probably a percentage of each one every time, if that makes sense. So if each one occurred on a scale from 0 to 100, each food or the environmental experience is going to be a ratio or on a continuum. And that's probably also based on the time of the month for your hormones. That's also probably based on your gut function that day. And so this whole thing can get, if you really want to look into how the body works, it can get really confusing. And you can end up really chasing your tail. And again, I am not minimizing someone who has a true anaphylactic issue and they have an EpiPen, on hand, because that is a hard life. And I know people like that. And I'm not saying that their experience isn't true. I'm just saying that it's possible that even if you're having IgEs, you could be having IgGs and vice versa. And those ratios might be changing over time, which is why a kid could have a very scary reaction when they're 6, but when they're 26, they don't seem to be that scary of a reaction anymore. It's probably their bodies change a lot, their hormones will change a lot, but maybe there's a shift too in the amount of IgEs versus IgGs that are built.
Got it. And how does the gut play into these type of allergies? Is it different, same?
Well, a lot of that is happening in and around the gut wall, and most of the mast cells are around the gut wall as well. So in general, the IgEs are going to happen more prevalently in and around the gut. And there is some data that I found that the IgGs are happening more inside the cellular response. And again, I'm not an immunologist. I don't know this, back and forth. The gut is more my specialty. The interplay between the gut and the immune is more just a new fascination and curiosity to try to understand. But my understanding at this moment is that most of our mast cells, most of our histamine is in and around the gut. Therefore, most of the IgE action is in and around the gut as well. And the IgGs are a little bit more spread out throughout the body and potentially in the cells. So what that suggests is similar to what I was saying. Like if you have red wine and you have a histamine reaction, how are we clear that it's just mast cell release and it's just histamine and not some IgE production or IgG production. And I don't think we are. I think it's a very
No.
convoluted mixture of all of these things, because that's typically how the body works. It's actually very complicated and also very beautiful in its ability to regulate us. So how do they relate? Well, if you're intaking a food that you don't agree with, and you have a immediate reaction, like your nasal passageways swell up, you get tachycardia, you have rashes, there's a lot of other things like hives, things like that. That is more histamine and IgE related, and it's definitely happening usually through the gut right away, because that's where a lot of that release will happen. If you get these delayed onset things, I think that might be a little bit more systemic. It doesn't mean your gut is fine, but it just means that it's a little bit more of a systemic problem, and you might have a stronger gut and less histamine reactivity.
Got it. So what could we do for the gut to help? Would it be the same thing for IgG and IgE, or would it kind of be slightly different because one of them is not necessarily as tied to the gut?
I think the pathway is the same.
Yeah.
So that's where I differ, I think, from a lot of people in my thinking on this, because
Okay.
if it is a giant soup of IgE and IgGs and histamines and just in overall inflammatory, for instance, it's also correlated that you'll have higher just like C-reactive protein markers or sed rates, things like this. The higher those numbers are, the more you'll see IgE numbers go up. And if you can bring those down and you can bring IgG numbers up, typically the lower your inflammation markers are and the lower the IgE releases. And so in general, what do we want to do? We want to lower inflammation. We want to absorb our nutrients. We don't want to feed our SIBO or candida or something like that. We want to have a healthy microbiome. We don't want to have gut problems when we eat foods. And so I think the pathway to regulation is the same. However, some people might have to dig out of a bigger hole the more reactive they are. So the more IgE and or histamine reactions you have, probably the longer road and the more healing you have to do versus having a lot of IgG reactions.
Yeah. So I was always somebody that would eat like tomatoes, for instance, and my nose would turn completely red. I would eat certain foods and immediately my face would flush. And so I kind of knew right away, like, this is not good. So going on like an elimination diet, which I did, carnivore diet, it helped. But what ended up happening is when I did, the first year, everything was calm and good. And I was like, oh, I've beaten this. But then everything after that first year started kind of flaring up again. And I found myself actually being a little more reactive to just my environment, not even trying to add in a bunch of foods, but just more reactive to my environment. So that was my clue. I'm like, okay, the gut is still not healed. If, I got that a lot of the fires put out by going carnivore, but then I had to kind of go a step further and address my stomach acid, addressed the enzymatic function, address the microbiome with some probiotics. So I guess how would somebody, was that a good way if someone could know that their gut wasn't necessarily healed? The elimination diet helped, but it didn't quite do the job. What else could you kind of look for, and how would somebody kind of know where to start on that journey?
Yeah, I mean, so something that's correlated to food sensitivities, it's pretty much like if I hear someone has a food sensitivity, I basically assume you have leaky gut syndrome.
Yep.
If someone has seasonal allergies, I don't assume you have leaky gut, but I think it's extreme risk factor for it. And so we got to think about that barrier function. And also when I say leaky gut, I also mean mucous membrane degradation, because that's the other big part of this is we want to create space between the mast cells and the incoming food, pollen, whatever it might be. So the healthier your mucous membranes, the healthier your gut wall, typically the better you're going to tolerate everything, your whole environment from pollen to food. And so, yes, I do believe that stomach acid function and digestive enzymes are just, for instance, vitamin D and magnesium. Like they're just that much of a staple for a
Yeah.
lot of people suffering with these issues. But if you wanted to like pinpoint in on histamine or on seasonal allergy issues or leaky gut, I would actually say that we would be talking more about things that heal the gut wall, zonulin, mucous membranes, things like butyrate and tributyrin, and then things that sort of help the immune system re-regulate itself. Because that's the other thing. If this has been going on through a family history,
Mm-hmm.
that's a lot of learning. Like your body's been learning this whole time that, hey, this thing comes in and we react this way. And then your eyes are like all gunked up and you can't smell or anything like that. And so I think part of what we need to do is heal up the mucous membranes, heal up any leaky gut, fortify the microbiome, and then retrain the gut immune system to be a little bit less reactive
Yeah.
and a little bit more tolerant of what's coming into the body.
Yeah. And I'll say just my own personal story, like I couldn't tolerate so many different foods. And I'm trying this year to seasonally just eat what's available seasonally, not stay on a strict, specific way of eating. And right now, the farmer that we work with sent us some strawberries, and I was like, oh God, am I going to, strawberries can definitely cause that face flushing, and they did for me in the past. And I just stayed away from them, but I loved them. So I've been trying out some strawberries for the last week or so, zero issues. Like,
Oh, that's awesome.
yeah, no problem at all. And they're delicious. Um, so I do think that, somebody who once had these food sensitivities, these allergies, things like this, when they kind of take the steps that you were just talking about, that it is possible for them to be able to tolerate these foods. Because what things I hear from people are, I can't tolerate fruit, right? I can't, and I even hear people saying I can't tolerate meat, and I'm like,
Sure.
that's a gut issue. Like
Yeah, totally.
that's a gut issue right off. I can tell you. Yeah.
Yeah, it's totally it's a gut immune issue.
Yep.
And I would suggest that, or I consider histamine as part of the immune system.
Yes.
I mean, it does play a role in a lot of different systems. Actually, it's kind of more like a hormone than it is anything else. But yeah, I think without a doubt, fruit, most vegetables, like not the nightshade families or the starch families, but like like the basics,
Yeah.
vegetables. I don't know. Let's pick some cucumbers, asparagus, broccoli, lettuce. These are very safe, inert foods, as well
Right.
as meat, like well-raised, wild-caught meats or whatever. These are like the most nutritious, least inflammatory foods on the planet. And
Right.
humans have been eating them for, I don't know, a couple tens of thousands of years, whatever your belief system is, as long as time is. And so if your body can't tolerate the safest, most nutritious foods on the planet, then that suggests there is a gut immune issue going on for sure. If you're working on
Right.
trying to eat like a French baguette with, cheese and
It's a different
egg,
story.
that might be a different story. But
Yeah.
basic stuff should be tolerable by anybody, and like any individual body. And when it's not, that is a strong indicator that we have these issues going on. And it's typically, I think, as you've learned, Sarah, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but the elimination diet, and I've seen this thousands and thousands of times, the elimination
Yep.
diet is like the antihistamines. It provides
Yes.
relief. And it's
Yep.
very important when you're in pain and your life is sucking,
Yes.
for whatever your symptoms are, do it, because it does help you figure out that you have control, you have responsibility, you can take actions. However, it doesn't necessarily make things better in the future. It just sort of
Right.
restricts your life and puts you in more of a box. And it doesn't
Exactly.
necessarily heal why you had to take those actions in the first place. And so I think what we're talking about here is, how could you bridge off of a strict elimination diet and antihistamine usage to a more, just occasional usage of antihistamines or something like that.
Yep. Yeah. And I guess talking about antihistamines, that was one of the things I definitely want to talk about today because I know a lot of people use them. That's something I used to have to start doing like in February. I'm like, okay, everything's going to start blooming in March. So I'm going to go ahead and buy my Claritin and start taking it now in February. I'd love to talk about some of the effects that these antihistamines have on the gut specifically.
Yeah, so there's basically three types of antihistamines. So it's really important just to get, like if you're going to take a supplement or a drug, just get like read up on it.
Yeah.
And so know what you are putting in your body. So there's H1 antihistamines and H2 antihistamines. And H2s are the gut stuff. They're like they basically suppress stomach acid, and they work on the gut through that pathway, through suppressing stomach acid and then suppressing some histamine related things with the stomach acid. H1 is your Claritins and your Benadryls. Now, Benadryl is it's the first generation H1s. Claritin is the second generation. Now, what changed? Well, they figured out that the first generations, a side effect of them is they typically make you drowsy. And so people didn't like that. So what does making you drowsy mean? It means it's crossing the blood-brain barrier. So Benadryl crosses the blood-brain barrier, and Benadryl's life-saving for an acute trauma incident, something like a bee sting, a rattlesnake. Well, not a rattlesnake, but some other allergic reaction. Like, take all the Benadryl in the world. Like, it's super important. Have it on hand. However, the H1 antihistamines that do cross the blood-brain barrier, they're starting to come out with research that suggests that it does cause neurodegeneration over time. And it's linked to a higher prevalence of the dementias and the Alzheimer's. So that is, if you're not paying attention to that right now, like the neurodegeneration diseases are on a skyrocket.
Huge.
Yeah. It's kind of scary to think about having 30% of the population sort of unable to function without a caregiver.
Right. Yeah. Which is what's I mean, I call it type 3 diabetes, Alzheimer's is on the rise, huge right now. And then those of us also with children, there's the epidemic of autism that these kids, like I have a daughter myself that I know she's probably going to live with me forever. And so all these things of neurodegeneration, we have to start paying attention to these things. It's like, we can't just take these things that are going to continue to contribute to this issue, right? So stomach acid becomes an issue with these as well as neurodegeneration, correct?
Yeah. So your type 1s, your Benadryls, those are the ones that are linked to the neurodegeneration. Your H1s, first generation, or type 1s is what they're called. Your H1 type 2s or second generation is your Claritins. Now, those have not been linked to any neurodegeneration that I can find or that I've heard of. Okay. However, they have been linked to potential heart issues. And they're also, they seem to stop working for certain groups of people over time. Like there's some sort of, it looks like a microbiome change happens. I found some interesting data this week that I'd never really looked into, just based on your question, Sarah, that suggests that the microbiome's different for responders and non-responders to the Claritin class of antihistamines. The question is that because of the usage, or is it because did it happen before the usage started? I don't, there's no data on that I could find at the moment. But in general, the issue with your H1 type 2s or H1 second generations, they don't cross the blood-brain barrier. So that was the pharmacological innovation that happened. And so you don't feel drowsy. You can take a Claritin or a Zyrtec and you can go throughout your day, right? The problem is, for a lot of people, is they either don't work or they stop working over time. And they're so new that we don't really have the data yet on what is 10 years of usage for 6 months out of the year due to someone. I mean, we don't have that data yet. So in general, what I find is if you wait long enough, every drug, because it's working on just one pathway and not working on the whole system, there ends up being side effects of some type at some point. So I assume there'll be a certain type of person, maybe it's their microbiome is messed up, Maybe it's a genetic risk factor that these antihistamines will also preferentially harm at some point in the future. So in general, I'm a pro, like, hey, if there's a life-threatening emergency, use them,
Right.
save your life. Same with antibiotics. Like they're amazing for their usage. But if this is becoming a habitual thing just to get through every springtime and summertime, then you're going to pay a price for that. Basically, that convenience and that cheapness of buying that drug and just taking it, for 6 months out of the year, you're going to pay for that at some point. I don't know what it'll be. I don't think anybody does, but you'll probably pay for it. And so I think that's my philosophy is that unless you're actually working on the root cause of why it's happening, there'll be a side effect. It's a side effect at some point that's going to cost even more.
Yeah, I mean, I thank goodness went doing the elimination diet and then just working on healing my gut. I don't have to rely on those things anymore. But for a lot of years, I did. I relied on a lot of things, for my gut that
So
I
did I.
know caused major issues, like led to a lot of depression and anxiety issues, which is definitely, in my opinion, related to the gut. Led to more and more food intolerances. It was like the older I got and the more I kind of abused the antihistamines and all the Tylenol and the SSRIs and things like that, the worse my food reactions became, the less tolerant I became to the whole world around me. And so, yeah, I think that we do maybe get some short-term help, but what the benefits long-term are not. I mean, there's not a long-term benefit, in my opinion.
No, I mean, I think the best thing to do in today's world is just treat people like adults, and adults get
Yeah.
choices. And if you want to choose to eat sugar and drink pop and
Yeah.
get obese, and that's your life. And if life is really stressful because you got newborns and you're remodeling a house or something, and you're really stuffed up and you can't think, taking Claritin for a week, I'm not judging any of that stuff, but I am
Right.
saying that if you are an adult and you don't want to be doing this for years on end and you want to correct anything now, that focusing on your food, focusing on your gut health and your immune health through your gut is the more holistic way and the less band-aid way to figure out these sort of seasonal issues and these food sensitivities.
Yeah. And how could, I mean, I guess using the healthy gut system, how could that help to stabilize mast cells and or help get someone off of these antihistamines they've been relying on for many years?
Yeah, so the two products that are like most geared for that are our Tributyrin X and our Holo Immune. And that being said, if you have low stomach acid and or low enzyme function, these two products will work less well for you.
Mm,
So I always go back to the basics. Can you actually break down and digest the food? Can you actually stop the bad things from coming into your body? If you can't do those things, everything else you do is going to work less well. Maybe it only works 70% or 80% rather than a full 100% benefit you could get from it. But that being said, if you're someone who's like, yeah, I already did that, I already tried those things, they don't really help, or I don't have those issues, then Tributyrin X is the first product and Holo Immune is the second product. And the reason why is Tributyrin X is a pharmacologically better version of butyric acid because it's time released. The molecule is time released, and then our special capsule is also time released. So you get this double time released effect, which ends up coating the intestine pretty well. And we get a lot of reports from customers who say that their food reactions go way down, their histamine reactions go way down. And my belief is just based on the research that what we're doing is we're increasing the mucous membrane barrier. We're increasing the tight junctions expression, which means we're getting rid of the laxity between your gut cells, and we're increasing microbiome diversity. And beyond that, we see in animal studies that butyric acid supplements are anti-inflammatory, which again, we talked about earlier. The higher your inflammation, your SED rates, your C-reactive proteins, the more likely you're going to have seasonal allergies, food sensitivities, every disease actually. So we want less inflammation, and higher butyric acid in animals as well as in humans is associated with less inflammation. So that would be step one. And then step two is the Holo Immune product, which is a combination of beta glucans and three special dead or heat killed paraprobiotics that are for immune. Like they have research studies in humans to help the immune system be smarter. And specifically, one of those strains, the L92 strain, actually has data both in animals and in humans around seasonal allergies and around inhibiting IgE production, which we talked about is the histamine sort of producing immunoglobulin. So those two in combination are producing some pretty great results for people. And I think that's where I would start.
Got it. Cool. And, I guess allergies, can they affect our gut health and digestion and stomach acid and the gut bacteria, just having those and not really doing a whole lot about them?
God, I'm getting immunoglobulins and antibodies mixed up today. I am all over the place.
It's okay.
Got no caffeine on board here.
That's okay.
For anybody who thinks that I'm like some special guy that doesn't struggle. So anyways, IgG antibodies, not immunoglobulins. Whew. I'm formulating a new product right now with some immunoglobulins. It's going to be pretty awesome for this.
Oh, cool. Very cool.
So what was the question about gut health? And
I mean, just can allergies just affect, our digestion? Can having all that excess mucus in the body and kind of not doing anything about it, can that affect gut bacteria, any of that stuff? Just curious.
I don't consider excess mucus a thing. I think we want our mucous membranes really healthy and thick. If you're having if you're seeing like mucus, like you're out of your nose or something like that, that's your body trying to get rid of things in general, is my opinion on mucus. But yes, if you have histamine reaction, if you have a poor gut immune interface, that you're creating too many IgE antibodies or too many IgG antibodies, you're essentially creating more inflammation and you're creating more cleanup for the body to regulate and do. And so that's going to cost you hormones like cortisol, estrogen, testosterone. All of these hormones are super important for the inflammation pathways and turning them on and turning them off. And so there's a second and a third order consequence to everything we do. And it's very hard as a human to think that deeply about what actions we take. And so in this case, the second and the third order consequences of, for instance, continuing to eat inflammatory foods that your body reacts to, like for instance, like strawberries or red wine, like things that are delicious, but you literally know, you feel a change, you notice a change. There's second and third order consequences, which is that your overall inflammation rate is going to be higher the next few days, and you're going to have to burn extra hormones and extra nutrients in order to turn that inflammatory cascade off. And if you do that enough, you kind of burn out those systems, or at least make them less reactive in the right way, meaning they're less able to react when it's time to react. They get less, they're less tolerant. That's not the right word. They have less ability to respond when they're called upon because they're getting used every single day. It's almost like overtraining. If you run every day for 60 days, yes, you get better at running, but you're also overtraining a bunch of things. And so when life demands happen, you may not be able to respond the way you want to respond. Same thing is true if we're pushing, things down the body that it's constantly reacting to. It gets better at reacting to those things, but maybe not in a good way. Maybe we start to get some overuse injuries.
Got it. That makes sense. So I guess to kind of review, because I think I went through all the questions I sent you, if somebody wanted to, maybe stop the overuse of antihistamines, stop, dealing with so many of these seasonal allergies, you would say the first course of action would be address stomach acid, address enzymatic function, then possibly look at sealing up the gut with something like tributylin, like butyrate product. And then would you add a probiotic, or would you do a probiotic like the hollow immune? Would you do that in the beginning, or when would you add that in?
Yeah, the hollow immune would come, and then I would add in a probiotic, like whether you want to do the one that you recommend, the ombre or seed or whatever one that you like. That would be the last step. It's all based on someone's ability to be with whatever they're happening in life. So let's
Got
say
it.
someone's like taking Claritin every day and they're
Yep.
still just struggling, like
Yep.
they're really struggling. Then I would say get in on the holoimmune and the Tributyrex right away. Like start those right away and then work your way back, but also check for low enzymatic function, see if that helps at all. Check for low stomach acid, see if that helps at all. If someone's on, say, Claritin and they're like, my life's pretty dialed, I'm on the carnivore diet,
Yep.
I take Claritin, I got a lot of demand, I'm a new mother, and I'm pretty, like, I don't want to rock the boat a lot.
Right.
They're not in crisis, if you will. Then I would say start with just check. Do you have low stomach acid? What does it do? Because you have more capacity to test and innovate and
Right.
explore your body. So I think
Right.
that's the difference, is whether you're in crisis mode and you just need an intervention, or you're more stable and more able to be curious about what your body's actually asking for or needing.
Got it. That makes sense. Yeah. I think that's really good, because I think some people are just going to listen to this and say, well, where would I fit on this, and how would I even get started? And how would somebody test? I know to test for low stomach acid, you basically would do like an HCl challenge, right?
Correct.
But how would someone really test for low enzymatic function? They would just have to try the enzymes out to see if they felt better, or what would that look like?
Yeah, it's going to basically be the same thing. I mean, look, if you have an amazing doctor near you, go get a Heidelberg test done or a GI pill capsule test done to actually check your stomach acid. It's the problem is there's like, I think less than 100 doctors or so in America. It's always changing, but there's not that many, and it costs like $300 to $500. So
Wow.
you can get a test for stomach acid. It's just tough, and for less than $50, you can just do it at home. And
Right.
if you test low, you already have the solution in your hands then. The same thing is kind of true with enzymes. Typically, people look at fecal elastase on a stool test as a marker for pancreatic enzyme function. But what they're forgetting is there's no marker for brush border enzyme function or microbiome enzyme function. And so we have less testing capacity for enzymes. And so again, usually does the product improve your life? Does it improve anything that you're dealing with? If so, then that's sort of an indication that yes, you do need the support right now. And if not, you can always just ask us for a refund, or ask whatever other company you're working with for a refund, since potentially you don't need it. Enzymes, testing for enzyme function is just not there yet right now, and it
Right.
makes sense, right? It's like right in the middle of your body.
Right.
It's very invasive to get in there. It's not easily done.
Yeah, the only way that I could kind of figure out on any sort of a test that my enzyme function was low is that when I did the ombre test, which is the probiotic that I always talk about, but I did their gut health test, and it'll show you your gut bacteria levels of all these different types of bacteria, but it will also tell you whether or not you have good or bad protein handling. And my protein handling score was like super, super low. And I kind of felt that too, because I would eat protein and then I'd have a higher blood glucose. And I'm like, this is
Interesting.
weird. Yeah. And so the cool thing, and I've done videos about this before, after using the enzymes and HCl for probably about 6 months solid, my protein handling score went from poor all the way up to excellent. And
nice.
yeah. And then I saw the same kind of reflected on my blood glucose. So that's the only way that I kind of figured, all right, I'm not breaking down this protein properly. There's something going on with my digestive enzymes. So, yeah, but that's, again, it's not really like a solid, like, this is your digestive enzyme function. It just said you're not breaking down protein very well.
Yeah. And that's, super important marker for digestion. But again, you can't necessarily screen for lactose or
right.
other brush border enzymes. But that's a great one. I love that.
Yeah. Cool. Well, any other thoughts here? Where we've kind of gone through, all the different questions about antihistamines, allergies. Any other thoughts on the topic?
No, I mean, I think the biggest takeaway, hopefully, that people walk away with is look, if you're using Benadryl on a regular basis,
Mm.
there is significant risk factors long term. At least switch to a Claritin or a loratadine. I think that's the generic version of Claritin, Zyrtec. These class 2 antihistamines for H1s. If you're using those on a regular basis and not just supplemental when it's a really bad day or you're kind of run down, there could be side effects long term, and we just don't know yet. And so my theory, I think Sarah's theory and her experience has been that, and my experience has been that the stronger your gut health, the better it's functioning, and the better your immune system is regulated inside of your gut, the less you'll even need to consider the usage of these products, and the less you'll battle with your environment as it's happening. And so the way to do that typically is, making sure your mucous membranes, your leaky gut, your microbiome diversity as well, and that your interaction between your gut and your immune system is working correctly if possible. And none of that stuff is really going to ever work out very well if you have low acid and low enzymes.
Agreed.
And so hopefully today people walk away with a better toolkit to just play with their bodies, get themselves out of pain when possible, and also some understanding of the long-term consequences of using supplements and things like that.
Awesome. And everything we talked about, the HCl enzymes, holoimmune, Tributerin, is all in the show notes for you guys with discount codes that are good through the end of this month. And that's the really great thing about Steve's company. I have to mention it every time, is if you get these products and for whatever reason they just don't work for you, they actually will give you a refund. And I've never seen another company that does that. So that's why I continue to say great things about the products. And I use them myself. My daughter uses them. My family does. And I think that they've been a huge part of my gut healing journey for sure. So
well, thanks for having me on, Sarah.
Yeah,
and we have health coaches on staff to help you with dosing. If you're confused, you're not getting results. We do have a Facebook group that's customers only that I'm active in, as well as our health coaches and our team. I think that making world-class products, which is what we do whenever we create a product, I believe it's designed to be the best in the world and solve an issue. But that's only 50% of the battle. The other 50% is getting the dosing correct for that person and what's happening for them.
Agreed. Awesome. Well, you guys check out all the stuff in the show notes, and Steve and I will be back probably next month with another topic. Not sure what that'll be yet, but we'll come up with some other gut health topics. So thanks again, Steve, for being here today.
Thanks, Sarah.
Awesome.